Okay, so tonight's book is, what's it called? Hidden? Hidden. And it's written by Michelle Graff. And she's here tonight. She's joining our book club. And
yay, Mishi!
So we're going to talk about the book for a little bit, and then we're going to ask her some questions about being an author, because we've never really had an author at our meetings before. So anyway, with that, I guess we get started. Hidden's a book about, what's her name? Sarah Mumford. And Michelle, she did a bunch of research on Sarah, a little girl who was murdered, and there's tie-ins to her family and things like that. But it was an interesting read, and I've written down a few questions, but if I don't know, how do you think we ought to get it started?
Let's start with Patty's quote.
Yeah, you got a quote, Pat?
I do have a quote, but I wasn't quite ready to read it, but I did. I can't find it. I loved this, Mishi. I thought it was. I know when Betty Ann read it, she said she had to read all of Sarah's chapters and then all of your Amelia's chapters, because she had a hard time going back and forth. I didn't find that for myself to be a problem. But I could see how it would be interesting. I might have to read it again and just do Sarah's chapters and Amelia's chapters. I didn't have to do it that first time. But it was just so interesting how you joined them together at the end, especially. Because they actually live in the same town. Yeah. These two stories were going on. They coincided.
It was the same timeline.
Same timeline.
So when did you come to the conclusion that I can write about Sarah and I can write about Amelia as a co-joined story as opposed to each individual?
Well, I have to say, so I've been researching my family for 20 years, and I have been just fascinated with Amelia's story since before I knew her name, because the idea of that her story got lost, just even as a child, before I knew anything about the story, I was just stuck on it. So once I learned her story, I was compelled to find a way to keep her memory alive.
Your grandmother,
my great-grandmother.
Your great-grandmother was a mystery in your family.
Yes, yeah.
No one knew what happened to her. Your great-grandmother.
Correct. And so I was so compelled, but I knew I just couldn't see it as a story, even for my own family. Like I wasn't even necessarily thinking about publishing, and because it just was so tragic. Who would want to read that story? And so Sarah's story I came across during the research of Amelia, and the more I learned about it, the more I thought, this is actually an interesting story. This is a story that maybe somebody might be interested. It's a mystery. Yeah. Someone might be interested.
You mean like going through microfilm, Sarah kept popping up?
Yes,
so
because
she started reading about it?
Correct. Because as I was combing through newspapers of the time to find more information about Amelia, and this was the headlines that entire summer. And it was the summer my grandmother was born. And so the more I read about that story, the more I thought, this is an unsolved mystery. And then I got the idea of writing a book with the idea that this is a way to tell Amelia's story, because the more I learned about Sarah, the more I realized there was a connection. Now, after I made that determination, I actually found out there was more of a connection than I originally thought. But I made the decision to tell the stories together right from the beginning. As soon as I decided to write the book, I decided to tell them.
How long ago was that?
About a year before I published.
How long?
So it was the end of 2022. Now, I had been researching my family and I had also been piecing together my family story for my family. So I was really deep into the research of that. And I was trying to find ways for my nieces and nephews to actually be interested in it and to make it interesting to them. So I was, I did a little slideshow, and made a little PowerPoint movie of the family history.
Wait,
and
so there's a slideshow?
not of this story, of my family story.
Oh.
Not of Sarah.
I was going to say, it's halfway to the movie.
Yeah. But Sarah, so the story of the Canoples, all of those families, how they came together.
Oh, I was saying Canople.
Well, you might be
They're
right.
Canoples?
I've always pronounced it Canople, but
Have you heard other people pronounce it?
my family never talked about it much because it just was a name.
Canople.
Yeah.
I knew some Canoples, a nurse
Yeah.
Canople.
That's
why I call it
I could be wrong.
So how long did you live in that time period? I mean, you're going back to 1889, 1890s,
Right.
90s.
1901. So did you feel fully immersed in that time frame?
Yeah, I did, because I did so much of my research, even of family history, was so focused on Amelia. I was kind of obsessed with her.
But Maud is your great-grandmother.
No, Maud's my grandmother.
I
knew Maud.
Can I read this?
Yes.
I wish I could write that Maud went on to have an easy life. The truth is, she lived a hard life. She raised 9 children during the Depression and lost 2, one in childhood and one in the Second World War. But Maud's life had meaning, and it touched so many others. She was devoted to her family and volunteered in her community as a Gold Star mother, which means her son was lost in World War II. Mm-hmm. She helped lead the cause for wounded veterans. I remember her as a loving grandmother. Maud lived long enough to see 18 grandchildren, 24 great-grandchildren, and today Amelia's descendants are numerous. I am proud to be one. I mean, sometimes the greatest form of justice is the truth, uncovering the truth. I just love that. That was like the end of the book, and it was like.
So were you kind of like trying to figure your family heritage like a lot of us?
Yes. Yeah.
For the longest time. But Sarah was never really a part of family lore.
No, not at all. In fact, most of that story wasn't a part of family lore. It was stuff I unearthed in my research. My family didn't talk about the family. My dad didn't know the names of his grandparents. Uh-huh. It was just cut off.
But that wouldn't have been uncommon.
No, I don't think it's very uncommon at all. In fact,
right.
Especially given the circumstance around.
Right. So all the ancillary characters, like Cleveland was a central character in this book. So how did you come across all of his?
The coroner.
Yeah.
How did you come across all his character development?
So since genealogy's been a hobby of mine for 20 years. So I've learned some tricks along the way. And one of the things I did, because there are other historians researching the story of Sarah Mumford, but I approached it like a genealogist. I took all those characters, because everybody in the book on both stories are true people, and then I researched them like I would if I was researching my own ancestor. I looked for newspaper articles. I found out when he was born. I looked in census records. I built his family tree, so I knew who his parents were when they died, where he went to med school, and there were a lot of articles about Cleveland because he had been a civil servant for many years. Right. So he was one of the easier ones to get information. But I wanted their backstories because I wanted, even though it's nonfiction, I wanted to use some narrative techniques that you would in any writing. So I wanted to do character development. As much as I could, I wanted to figure out what each character's motives were, what they valued. And, all of our motivations, all of our characters are developed by our experiences and how we respond to them. And so that's how I did that. I just looked looked at what had happened to him throughout his life.
Well, they
How did he
acquire
respond?
a sense of, I mean, to me, they seem to acquire a sense of personality
Yeah.
through all your research, which I thought was interesting because the research would be pretty dry. But, you know, a character personality development's pretty color rich, so I thought you did a pretty good job there.
Thank you.
So is there a room in your house that has like one whole wall that has these these yarn strings that come through like we see
It's
in the movie?
funny
Do
you
you
should
do
say that.
that?
Did they tell you the story that you're
No.
I absolutely had a murder board.
Did you?
Yeah.
Murder board.
What?
Like
So,
like NCI type stuff.
yeah, I should get my
You
phone.
sold
I'll
it.
show you the picture.
You have a phone?
And
yeah.
it didn't. I took a picture of. I still have it. It's actually up in my. So not in my
With
family.
photographs of everybody.
Of and now I did this particularly. It wasn't a storyboard for the book. It was actually about 3 months into researching Sarah's story. I got the wild idea that perhaps I could solve the murder.
Wow.
And so I did like they did in the movies where they have, and I had, I got a giant board. I put the pictures up. I have the motives, the possible motives. I have little red strings. And honestly,
Is there a map?
there is a map of Pendleton
Did it look
because I
like
did a
it?
timeline.
Did
I
it
did,
look like The Beautiful Mind?
a little maybe perhaps, but it sounds crazy, but that helped me immensely. I looked in places I never would have looked because of that, because I saw connections I wouldn't have seen. I started to think about that Lauren had a wife, and wait a minute, she wasn't really mentioned here. Where was she? And I'd go back and I kind of mapped out the timeline
because
of the death and what made sense and what didn't
never
make sense.
showed up
Yeah,
initially.
and I
Because
looked
she was like an under person.
right, and all, but yet we know, at least if we believe the testimony of Mrs. Tripp or Matilda, that when she says when Sarah went missing, she went across the street to her son's house, and they had not seen her, so they were home. She was there. She was around, and then of course. During my research,
And she probably had the baby.
Well, and yes. And so the babies I discovered, I did not know that. That was not in any article about this that had been written after the case. I actually found those through my research. And then went and got I actually went to the clerks. They had to go to the different town clerks and discover them, and then have to kind of look into why would they be filed in this town, and that's how all of that came out.
Have
So
you
did
guys
you go
done?
to the graveyard?
I did go to the
And so
graveyards, yes.
So the little
of the sudden
baby-
appearance of the gravestone that
Of the
wasn't
baby
there. So it's still
that
there.
Sarah
It's
probably
still there,
had.
yes.
Really?
Yeah, those gravestones.
Sarah probably had that baby, and
Yeah.
what's
And
her name?
even the proximity of the gravestones to me told me a lot of things. And the one stone is actually kind of set in. It's hard to see because you know how it's a flat one. And you know how they get, and it's
They sink.
yeah, because they had put the newer one in front in that plot of the one of the first baby, and then to go in and look and see that it said infant son of Lauren Tripp, and all of that kind of.
What's her name?
Lauren
His
was the wife's
Lauren's wife.
Carrie.
You just said it.
Carrie?
a minute
No,
ago.
is it Carrie? Yeah.
Carrie.
I don't know why
Yeah.
I'm drawing a blank now.
Yeah, you
Lauren,
said it
Lauren
a
was the
minute
husband,
ago.
was the
Yeah,
man's
no.
name. Yeah. And so all of that, and then to find the records and match them up of those children,
Right.
that
So
was
what'd you make of the big 1899
Mhm.
records are completely they're expunged? What did you make of that?
Okay, so
What was their explanation of that?
well, the records were, there's two different things. So the birth records were all there, many of the records in 1899. What I couldn't find was the court transcripts.
But there was a whole year of.
No, that was the newspaper, the Tonawanda News. And there was no explanation. They didn't know why. That could be anything. It could be that.
Well, but that was a really important year in this story.
Absolutely. I thought it was a wild, to me, honestly, my mind could go that somebody back then was trying to hide something.
Yeah.
But it could certainly be explained by many other things.
Right.
You know, it's a stack, you know, back then their newspaper records might have literally been a stack of papers, and that stack somebody poured water on it accidentally, or there could be 1,000 reasons why there is no record of that. It was just not preserved well. And so there's a gap in the microfilm.
But that's a very
So you went back at the scene of the crime, and you went back to like 18, either through your genealogy or through actual file research on site. You went back to 18. So all those records are there. You can dig them out.
Oh, absolutely.
Out
And
of
a lot of them are
basements and
a lot of them are digitalized. I mean, there's quite a bit.
Thank
Sites
goodness.
like
You'd hate the
Ancestry.com, and which is one of them. There's many resources that newspapers are.
Has anyone else
digitized.
at this table done any research on their genealogy?
No, but I have
Bill
a cousin
has
who
done
has.
a little on his family. You what?
I have a cousin who completely researched my dad's side of the family.
Your dad's side of the family, so you have that information.
Somewhere, yeah.
I mean, he told you about
Yeah,
it.
no,
and
he
then
gave everybody a copy of it.
Yeah.
He spent
And
a
your
lot of
dad
time.
came from where?
Germany, I think. I don't remember.
Bill's done quite a bit on his mom.
It is a strange time period for sure to find information on people and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, like my grandfather, he was like surf. I don't know.
Surf?
I mean, he had to.
What's
he
surf?
Serfdom, you know. He was like a
Slave. Like
he was like a slave. He had to work as a young child for some guy for money, or
He was
lived-
he was
Yeah, his
indentured.
He
family.
was
Right.
indentured. Yeah.
His family was poor, and so they hired him out, right?
That's the rumor. I mean, like we're seeing from this story,
Where
it can be
was
pretty
this?
hard.
Where?
I don't know. I couldn't really tell you.
Okay.
It's hard to find this kind of information. You know, this is early 1900. You know, 19.
I know my
1910.
dad's family, my grandma and grandpa's
Some of it's really
came
well
through
documented.
Canada, from England to Canada and down to northern Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book called Glen Flora, and it has my dad's mom or dad, Bill, because you've read part of it. My dad's mom or dad, my dad's family who came from England to Canada to Glen Flora, Wisconsin. And there's a little book, and I should read it. I've never read
And
it.
that's really cool if you have
There's a
that,
book,
like
yeah,
if there's
somebody-
a book. So
Wrote a book, and
Did you-
now your family will have this little book.
yeah.
Did you run into any problems with confidentiality of information that you couldn't get to?
Yes, but really I shouldn't, that because it's over 100 years. But I did have, so kind of as a follow-up to yours, so a lot of the information I got in newspapers, old newspapers, but also records that have been digitalized, but not all records have. I had to go to, like for birth records, death records, to the actual county clerk offices. In New York in 1880, I think about 1880, 81, there was a law that they had to register births and deaths. So starting then, and they were
Right, because
big books.
sometime in the book they weren't registering.
Yes. Well,
births and
they were
deaths.
supposed to, but they
just
didn't.
didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In
that's what
the
happened
book-
to some of the kids that were born in this family.
The book that in, like, for example, the town of Pendleton, it is a big giant rectangle book that's
you leaf through.
handwritten, and well, with the clerk or do it with me, you know, she would help and bring it out. So I had a lot of historians and clerks and stuff that had to help me with this.
So were they
And-
enthusiastic?
Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. And to your story, her death record was in the town of Lockport. The town of Pendleton clerk, for example, loved it when I called her because she got so excited about, you know, normally she's just registering paperwork for marriages
Yeah.
and stuff. So many were very enthusiastic. Many of the historians were enthusiastic because they knew the case and they had, were interested in learning more. But in Lockport, when I tried to get Sarah's death record, they called me back. They actually called me, like I filled out all the forms, and they called and they said, "You're not a relative. We can't give you this. This is
That's what I was
yeah.
wondering.
This is
How
your
you got information so freely."
Well, but I had actually done kind of the law research to
I'm
see
a
what I could get, what I
detective.
can get. Well, I didn't say that. I was nice about it, but I was like, I think though, that's for recent records. After 100 years, you actually, the laws of New York States, they become open records. Actually, I think it's 75 years, but
Wow.
this was well over 100
Yeah, well over
years.
what it was.
Oh.
And I said, and this person has no descendants. So it really is okay. And she was like, she goes, I went to my superiors and they told me I could not tell you this. And so I said, well, I actually think I know what's on it, because there was an article in the 60s where the person that took care of had talked about what was on Sarah's record. And so I told her, I go, I think this was her death date. And she goes, uh-huh. And I said, I did. And I go, and I think the cause of death was killed by cars. And she says, you're right.
Killed by what? Cars.
Killed by the
Cars.
cars. That's
Train
what
cars.
how they cited train cars. And
Very
so
common.
she confirmed what I
That's the way
knew
that's
about
the
it.
term they used.
killed by
Oh.
the cars
If
was
you
what
were
was
run
called.
over.
Very
Yeah.
common.
Very common. Yeah. Because
Lots of people got
yeah.
killed.
Well,
by
that was one of those things that was just fascinating to me to learn. How many people were, think about it. Here were these rural communities, and then that had horse and buggy as their means of transportation, and then they just put in these giant train tracks ripping through with these 30-mile-an-hour locomotives coming through. They didn't know how to judge how to walk past the track. They couldn't. It just was.
They're used to
There were no train things.
Yeah.
They got hit by them all the time.
It's kind of like being frozen in the first black and white movie when there was a train coming towards you and everybody started running out.
Yes, exactly.
But
So-
yet you say you don't think she was killed that way.
No, and I think that's pretty well held. Like, that's not a new revelation. The investigators at the time, the doctor that did the autopsy said,
Cleveland.
yeah, and Pettit, who was the doctor,
Pettit.
yeah, that she had to have been dead before. They were fairly
'Cause of
sure,
the
yeah,
blood.
that she had been dead before the train hit her. So that was sort of established at the time.
Was how did they speculate she died?
Well, the family that she lived with was charged with it. But there was not enough evidence. Part of the problem, I think,
Circumstantial.
Circumstantial
Mhm.
beaten? Was she? They speculate beaten.
She had brain trauma.
Mhm.
Her brain
Blunt
was
force.
crushed in, and the train didn't hit the brain.
but it could conceivably have been caused by the hitting around. It was really hard for them to distinguish what the actual cause of death was.
So that it came up at least twice that I remember the brake line being broken loose and they put a wooden plug in it.
Yeah.
Well, so why did you bring that up twice?
It was in the newspaper.
Yeah, it was, and that was in the newspaper. I think I brought it up as it came out in the testimony in the
Yeah.
trial, but I also used that to paint the picture of the night of her death from the perspective of the train.
Yeah.
And I really just did that twice, really, as that was more of a literary
Something-
thing that
It happened when they ran over her.
Right.
Something lodged loose, and that's all they really knew at first was this piece that popped off when they hit her.
And that was the perception of the engineer, and that's what
Yeah.
he testified to. The reason why I started the book off that way is because I started doing this chronologically. And I realized that it began in a not very engaging way. And I didn't want to mess with the chronology, so I added that first chapter of what happened from the perception of the riders of the train. And I did that one just because it was a little better of a hook, frankly. But I also did it because I did a lot of research on that train and going through, and I thought there was an interesting, here was this train filled with sort of that class of people that would go to the theater.
Upper class.
And how oblivious, and not that it was any way their thought, but of what was going on outside.
They had no idea.
They had no idea. And I think there was a little bit of the haves and the have-nots in the story. And so I thought it was kind of a nice way to just show that in the beginning. And then, as it turned out, I could end on that note because, all this was true, like everything in that story was true, that it just so happened that Sherlock Holmes made its world premiere in Buffalo, and that theater
was
train,
the play they were going to watch
on the not in the beginning but in the end.
Yes.
That truly was the play that they all went in that
my
same
God.
route at the end after they were
and
acquitted.
investigative reporting and what's the word that police use to look at all the clues and stuff. That was all forensics was all just happening.
Yeah.
Fingerprints were just happening. Not yet, actually. If they could have had fingerprints, that would have been a telltale sign on her body.
One of the fun
possibly.
parts for me in the research was doing all the kind of side angles that I had to research and learn about, and
What was
reading
happening
books
at
on
the time.
forensics, which I
Yeah.
find fascinating. And I had no, if you would have asked me a couple of years ago, what did they know about forensics in 1899, I wouldn't have known. And I was both surprised at what they did know and what they didn't.
So have you been contacted by other researchers? Because apparently this is still kind of an open case.
Yeah.
So do people contact you to say, hey, what are you thinking? Or I thought about this? Or
Not yet. I mean, I have had some feedback because I have gone and it was interesting. I went.
Or have you been called a nut
My last
and you're totally wrong?
No.
And
I haven't
Contacted
really.
by
Yeah.
the other family.
No,
When-
all you presented was actually what was known.
Yeah.
And what people talked about. I mean, the fact that Carrie actually probably took Sarah's child that was born a few months before Sarah died and pretend like it was her own.
And all of that stuff was stuff that I kind of found that I
found.
had
It
not
was
seen in
not-
any of the more recent articles. So that was, I think, new to the historians locally. I've gotten good feedback, not a lot of detailed feedback. I've sent all the research I had. One of the other things that I found that is not easily accessible is I actually did find her records in the orphanage, and I did that through the University of Rochester. In working with them, I found a researcher, Sarah. So I found a researcher on that end that found that for me and sent it to me, and that was very exciting for the local historians because they weren't even sure who she was and kind of.
And the fact that she actually had two sisters that were her
Yeah.
mom
Yeah,
that still were alive.
yeah,
after.
and there had been some speculation that she probably had some family around, but that was kind of interesting to them. Nobody has told me I was a kook or that I was wrong. When I went into the Niagara County historian office, I went in and my book was. I went into actually.
Say, how did you present yourself?
So I came in. Exactly. So they, I had
Do you
been
have a
in there
do you have a
before.
She
business
wore
card?
her royal shirt.
I had been in that office before asking questions about Sarah, so they were not.
here
I
she
was not
comes
involved.
again.
Yeah, exactly. I was that annoying person that had come in a few times before. But I came in I was going to donate a copy of my book, and they had one sitting right there already, and it had little kind of notes and stuff stuck in there.
Sticky notes in it?
Yeah, and so
That's a good sign.
and I did tell them.
Somebody
I said,
was
if
reading it.
anyone has any questions, they did ask for my card. I gave it to them for people to call, And I said, because I did find some stuff, and the historian said, yeah, you found quite a bit. And that was the only feedback I got from them. So I don't know, and there's actually a couple different historians' office. One had said that maybe they'll have me come back and do a presentation, which I told them I would be more than willing to do. So that kind of excites me, the idea that someone might take it up and go a little more. It's why I include the bibliography, because I'm done with Sarah. I mean, I had to like put an end to it. You could take something. I have more of my own family to research,
Yeah.
but
You know,
maybe
kinda
somebody
like
else.
Jason was saying, you know, you kind of claim that Lauren's family, Lauren,
Mhm.
is the culprit.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that would maybe make his family descendants angry.
Well, they were accused at the time, and that's sort of the prevailing opinion that they had something to do with it. The thing that wasn't known at the time is why. You know, why? Like, what would the motive be? You know, they were suspicious. They contradicted themselves. There were, you know,
How old
most
was
of
she
the
at the
local
time?
people.
Nobody ever
15.
the motive is the child.
Well, that's my
That's
theory.
your
Yeah.
theory.
That's my theory. Is that
Well,
And
the child,
she carried-
the child in anger.
She carried a child of Lauren's.
right?
Yeah.
Actually,
For the wife who couldn't get pregnant.
right. But what I actually believe might be, it certainly could be that she wanted to see that child, and she was fight. She fell, hit her head. Okay, that would be a reasonable explanation. I think it's more likely that what happened to her was the same thing that happened to Amelia. Because the way things were in the records that she had that child, they couldn't have called the doctor. The doctor, there was probably a week delay before it was registered, which is not that uncommon, that second child. But if the doctor came out, it was afterwards, and he wouldn't have been told that she probably had to get up and continue to serve the family. And she was seen a month later by the neighbors, and she was in rags. The neighbor comments, she's not in a good, she's scared, I think that she never got the medical treatment. She got sick, a couple months. In what I learned in my research, because
nicest scenario.
Yeah, perhaps, yes.
You're
but
giving
it's
them
still
the benefit of the doubt.
I don't think it is the benefit of the doubt,
Well,
because I think like Amelia,
They didn't beat her in your scenario.
well, but they didn't call the doctor,
Right.
and
she got septic
because if
attack.
they would have called the doctor, then it would have too much would have been revealed. She was very young. She was 15, so I mean it was very young, and I think what I learned through Amelia's story was that women that don't get the proper treatment and that die of sepsis, that usually does happen a period of time after. It doesn't always hit, because they get up, they move around, they go on, they're not getting care, and the infection develops and eventually spreads to the blood. So I think that could just as easily been the cause of death, and then they took her body and put it on the train tracks.
So you're, as a professional social worker, how has your sense of societal trauma informed your story writing?
I don't know. I suppose it's possible that the work I've done has maybe even biased it in some ways, that I'm more apt to see that trauma in everything.
Or you can see through the fog.
Or
to something.
I think more that you're a woman than
perhaps
even a social worker.
I will say I
Women
did
have really
become
suffered.
very, in my research, I've researched much more than what ended up in the book, just to inform what was going on. And I did a lot of research on the child welfare system at the time.
Orphanages?
Yeah, and I probably was more fascinated with that because of the work that I've done, because my work's mostly been in child welfare. And I thought it was fascinating how many problems we still struggle with,
Yes.
how we're having the same debates. But at the same time, child welfare didn't exist.
Right, there's a time and a place.
Yeah, and so there weren't a lot of advocates for children. There were some, but they weren't a lot.
They didn't have a follow-up once they placed the child in a home. No one ever went to check.
No, that's not true.
Yes, in the book.
No, in the book it says that some people would come around.
That was
in the end, yes, and as a response.
That was after 1890. That was after the turn of the century.
But you're
in
right.
1850 and beyond and before, they would place them, and we're so glad that they were out of their care. They never checked on
But
them.
I do think he's right that I think one of the things that was the era that, because of stories like this, and there are so many. I mean, this is one of that. There was some reform that was going on too.
There's
it wasn't
still reform going on
and there's
today.
still going on today. We kind of it's like a pendulum
We still
swing.
have children in foster care that never get checked on.
Yes, yeah.
No, they're trying to reduce child labor laws. There are states that are trying to loosen
Make
child
it
labor laws.
loose.
I heard
they can
yesterday
go
about
work
in
at a young
Louisiana, someone has introduced a bill to prohibit requiring workplaces to give children lunch breaks.
Right. Right.
I mean, that's
crazy.
It's so no, it's
Or releasing the number of hours that a child can work. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff
and
going on.
lowering the age at which they
On a
can work.
state level.
So we're going backwards.
And you
in
see
some
that,
states.
and even the conjugate care versus family care, and that it was interesting to me how some of those debates. I've been in this field long enough to see the pendulum swing back and forth, and they were going through that then too. I do think one of the things about having a system with so few safeguards is it was a magnet for people who really did have bad intentions. I think most of the people in child welfare then and today have good intentions.
Yeah.
But because there weren't safeguards, I think there were characters that had very, not just not good enough intentions, they actually had very dark intentions.
Malicious, yeah.
And were profiting off of the sale of children and knowing that they were putting them in positions where they were not being cared for and nurtured. And
So your interest in child welfare, they had the trains, the
orphan trains,
trains that took them out west. So did you? I mean, how close did that come to?
That was actually after this. It started in like the early 1900s. So that was actually again the idea during that reform
Did they overlap?
period. I don't think the orphan trains. I could be wrong about this. I don't think they started until the 1900s. Okay, go ahead.
You know Mike Mahoney.
Yeah, I know who he is. Yeah.
Mike Mahoney was on an orphan train from Ireland.
Yeah.
He was adopted.
I think that was happening more like the teens in the 20s. And so that was again
Close enough, though.
close enough, certainly.
Wow.
Right after,
The trains were right after the trains were built.
yeah, and maybe it was maybe there might have been a little overlap, but it wasn't. That's not how she was. She was involved with that. But I think that was an attempt of recognizing. They were starting to recognizing that orphans weren't maybe the best place. Orphanages weren't the best place for. So I think the initial intent was a good one. Let's find them families. Of course, they were just sending some of them to horrible lives. And so I think it's a similar kind of circumstance that they weren't really. I thought it was interesting how I think my first thought was in the orphanage that she came from. I was kind of in some ways looking for some dark, dirty secrets in there. And what I found was, I think those women obviously they made some mistakes, but I think they really did want to provide the best for the children, that orphanage. They were trying to do their best. But given the times, indenturing children
You
seemed like a good...
conveyed that in your story, though. You didn't didn't gloss over it, but I interpreted from your writing that there was a real attempt to, learn from experience.
Yeah.
And once it burned down and they killed 30 people, well, then they looked to see what we could do to prevent that from happening again, which is kind of curious.
Yeah.
Interesting. What was the most curious, or I guess the most curious or surprising fact you came across in this story writing?
There were a lot of things. So I think one of the most surprising things was that one of the young men that Henry Tripp accused was actually my great step uncle, I guess you would say. That it really had a family connection, which also gave me an in to get them to look. That's how I was able to get them to look for the transcripts, because my relative, my ancestor actually testified in this case. And so that was after I decided to write them together that I found some of that information. So that, to me, the day I found that, I was like, holy cow. It was Henry Bender or Henry Burmeister.
They were accused.
Yeah. They were accused, yeah. And so they testified they had alibis, but they did. So that was very surprising for me. And as I'm like, I had to actually put my ancestor up on the suspect list in my murder board. And I had to, and I was like kind of on the term. I'm gonna lie. I will show you a picture. It's in my spare bedroom right now. I haven't had the heart to take it down, which is a little crazy. I know.
No, no.
But
so you.
It actually goes all the way around her back.
Yeah. Mishi, had you written your other two books first?
Yes.
So you kind of, for anybody, I know my brother Doug says, I'm going to write a book someday. But who else says, I'm going to write a book someday?
About what?
Oh, it'll be fantastical.
But
anyway.
It does take a little
He
obsession.
says that. I don't know anyone else in my whole life who has ever said, I'm going to write a book someday.
And who did it?
Huh?
How long did the research for this book take?
He hasn't yet. But
That's
my
a
brother
hard question
Doug
to
says,
answer,
I'm going to write a book
because
someday. Because he's
the Canople
thinks it's
family. I've
so
been
cool to
researching
be able
for 20
put
years.
together a whole.
And through that, I knew a little bit. I had done a little research on Sarah, but from the time I decided to write the book is when I really took a deep dive into that story. And so I'd say a year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Just a year,
Wow.
not 7 years, Jason.
Can we kind of
I know
switch
it.
gears now?
but
and
I
talk
also-
to her like as an author.
What?
Can we ask her questions as an author now?
Oh wait,
I mean,
instead of a friend,
as an author.
not as a friend.
No, not about the book. About the whole idea
Process.
of being.
Yeah.
An
You're
author,
trying to
Do you like your
direct us
editor?
in a
Publishing a
different
book.
direction.
Yeah, and why did the
Well,
editor miss so many things?
Why
in
did
this
you
book?
kill your editor?
The doctor picks up a speculum
Yeah.
and he puts a stethoscope back into his bag.
Well,
What the hell?
Have you
actually-
heard that before, Mishi?
I actually,
Had you heard that one before?
Oh, did he do that?
Yeah, in the book.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
He pulls out a
Okay,
I
next
didn't
book,
know
will
that.
you
he
be
pulls,
my
he
editor?
pulls out a speculum
Yes,
and he puts
Jason
back a
needs
stethoscope.
to be-
No,
Okay,
I can't
you're
say
the
that.
editor of my next book.
no.
Yes.
No. Jan needs that.
By the way, if you need a new editor,
I've probably read that book, not to mention my editor and beta readers. I've read that book 100 times and I've never
Why
noticed
don't you
that.
confirm what Jason is saying?
I didn't notice
Uh-huh.
that.
I believe it. I totally believe
I
it,
do.
and I know.
Well, I had to go back and read it
I
again.
actually
I don't know how
That's
to
why I
I
find
know
remember.
it.
exactly the scene he's talking about.
Yes.
What chapter is it in,
Yeah.
Jason?
Yeah, he
It's
goes in
towards
to
the
check
end.
there.
It was when he comes to check on her at the very end, so it would be like chapter 49. I'm just guessing, but around
Oh
there.
my God, I only
And it's
have
an Amelia
dates.
chapter.
Well, I happen to
don't
know what a
have-
speculum is, which is why I go, what?
Yeah.
So,
Oh my God! No,
But anyway,
this
so what'd
didn't
you think
make
of your
me crazy. I'm
editor?
sorry,
I
sorry.
actually loved my editor, and she was not a
Can you do a
very
word search for
picky,
speculum?
detailed person.
What
She
is
gave
that?
me
Okay.
great ideas of what to expand on, and
Where
to
did you
tell
come
me
Ah.
that I don't know anything about what it looks like in Niagara County. You need to expand on that,
Oh,
or I
that's-
need, you
Oh,
know,
cool.
in
be
areas
cool
I
if this
needed.
was
She
it.
was the one that told me I needed to. I did all that research on the forensics, but in my original drafts didn't really include a lot. I just wanted to make sure that.
All
I
right,
got
here's
it
the
right.
speculum.
And he. I
And
can't.
now I will look at the stethoscope. Yes,
Where does it
Dr.
say stethoscope?
Hulwig.
Well, I
Hulwig.
say Hellwig, but you know the thing is,
Hulwig.
I've never met these
No,
people.
thank you.
So I
Now-
might be saying it
Hulwig.
wrong. I don't know.
Hulwig pulled the speculum from his bag. Now we're gonna look at.
How did you
Just look
get
at that
assigned
page
your
numbers.
editor? I mean, where did
I
One's
chose
65.
I chose her.
from where?
I
Okay.
used Reedsy, which is a
A publishing?
Stethoscope.
no.
Online
He
It's an
folded his
online-
stethoscope
no,
back
it's
in his
a-
black.
It's
It
a-
is true.
Uh-huh.
We just found the
Yeah.
stethoscope on the next
I
page.
have no doubt.
Of course it's true.
Yeah. I just can't
Well, Pam wanted me to check.
folded the
Fact
stethoscope.
check.
Fact check.
That is funny. I'm not going to release the second edition though. I'm going to see how many people actually discover.
So how many
Only
books
one
have been
will
sold?
ever.
I probably sold a little over 200, but I get quite a few.
Like hard copy or online?
A combination
So
of both.
Kindle, do you get the
I
same
get-
with Kindle as
so-
you would a hard copy?
That's probably easier.
I've never looked. It's probably maybe a little more of the ebooks than the hard copy.
Yeah, because it's easier to
Um,
get out there.
It's cheaper too.
And people always ask me.
I mean,
today,
if you have a Kindle, why would
today I put it out there to the people that we know that read in the family, especially, but some friends, and they all ask me for a copy, and I was like, "Sorry, I have Kindle. You have to get your own copy."
so?
Isn't that a good answer?
Well, there you go. Yeah.
So I know Betty or someone, Ellen, Betty,
It is in the public.
because you
library,
guys
though.
read it in your book. club.
Yes.
And it's
yeah.
checked out.
It's in the
Yeah.
public
Oh,
library.
is it checked out?
I had to. I got it on Kindle because
Well,
Now,
that
by
always
us.
makes me excited.
because
when people read
I
it.
couldn't
Yeah.
because it
How
never
did
came
you
back
guys
in.
get it, Jan?
Kindle.
You got it.
Oh,
on
you
Kindle.
guys did Kindle.
Yeah.
You usually check out
Yeah.
books.
It
don't
wasn't
you?
available.
I already had it on Kindle.
So where
Okay,
I
well.
get the most
So you
reads
purchased
though
it.
is
Yeah.
I enrolled it in the Amazon Kindle Unlimited. So people that have you know they
Unlimited.
pay that subscription, they have access
Oh,
to
we
it.
don't do that yet.
And Amazon then
They want
pays
to.
Amazon pays the authors per page read, and I get several hundred page reads a day, which is more. The
Wow.
book is only like 200, so I'd say at least a book a day, if not more, is read up through Kindle.
Wow.
I'm
do you
gonna
mean by
try to
page
do
read?
this.
What do you? Oh,
So
you
I'm
got
Jason,
there.
so
will you
instead
help
of
me?
getting a royalty for selling the book,
What do you
I
need?
get
Water.
Just give it.
on Kindle like the
I couldn't
pages,
pick
I
it up.
get
Careful.
paid per page because they're
Not per
those
page actually read
Do you
by
need
the
some?
person.
per
Anybody?
page flip through.
Oh, okay,
You know, so yes, I would imagine.
okay.
You know, if they Amazon can tell if they're reading it. I don't know.
Boy, that's
I don't
creepy.
really. Yeah, it is creepy. But
I was
that's,
just thinking that.
yeah.
No more Kindle.
Yeah. No, but that's not for people just that have a Kindle and buy ebooks.
Yeah,
that
it's
would be the people
unlimited.
that have that unlimited subscription. They keep track of how many
Oh, okay. I
are
don't have that.
how many people read it, and then they pay their authors per page. So if somebody, so in other words, I would get if somebody read half the book and stopped, I would get paid
However
for
many
half of
pages
it.
they were.
Yeah,
Or
for
if
how
somebody's
many
like
pages.
doing research, they go on and read
And
a
they go
few
back
pages.
and forth. Yeah, I don't know how that works. If they can go back and forth. And
Okay, we'll
read
go
it
home and
twice.
flip all the way through the book many,
That's
many times.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I did have one more
Yeah.
quote. We're supposed to have a quote each book.
A what?
A quote
A
each
quote.
book. We started this about a year ago. I know. You
Well, we have the stethoscope quote is going to be my
there you
favorite.
go. You got your
Yeah.
quote in,
Uh-huh.
Jason. I've got one more quote.
I'm going to write my.
And I
editor when get home.
loved it, and I think it's a quote that I need to use for life because often I have tunnel vision, and this quote says, "Someday, Amelia," she said, and I think this was her mom that was telling her this, But it could have been that cool aunt. Amelia had an aunt too that used to come and give her a little. She was.
I'm going to tell you a story about the aunt.
So okay,
After,
you'll tell me who it is.
But I think this is
But
her
she
mother.
said, someday, Amelia, she said, you'll learn to see through other people's eyes. Which I think is so cool. When you can see through other people's eyes. You
I
get
almost
out of
snipped that
yourself.
sentence.
I can see through your eyes right this second.
Patty, I
You
And they are rose-colored glasses.
I almost deleted that. That when in my rereads, I almost took that out because I thought it was a little too sappy. I'm so glad I left it in. Thank you for picking that.
I think it's the most important thing of the whole book. You've got to see through other people's eyes.
Well, and I wanted to, Amelia was a young girl, and obviously she had to have learned something. A little of that. The book, Sarah's story is nonfiction. Everything from the color of the beds came from my research. All the quotes came from research. Amelia's, although the characters were real people, the big events, the child was born, her sister died.
But her little things that she would say.
Obviously,
Mom.
the conversations, I have no way of knowing that her
What
mother
about-
really said that.
What about the shack where you said the floorboards let in more sunlight than the windows?
I had a description.
Yes.
They called it a hovel.
Right.
So I had enough of a description to know that it was not a,
hovel.
and I also know the area. I drove
Right.
where I don't think it still exists. It was probably torn around, but I know what those houses, the size of those houses. I know what they look like from the
sounds
time
like that
I looked at
Russian
pictures.
term.
So.
A hovel.
It means basically a shack. They were probably
Where
squatting.
the sunlight comes through.
Yeah. So
board.
yes, a little artistic liberty, but it was based
Okay.
on my research.
So when you
that's
write your
cool.
book or books,
Uh-huh.
do you get a legal tab or do you do typewriter? What do you do?
That a little of both. I actually use index cards. I'm a plotter. I had the whole, and the timeline, because it was real life. I didn't make up the timeline. I had to kind of discover the timeline in Sarah's story. So I had to, piece together the articles, because sometimes the articles were written after the facts happened. So I had to develop a timeline and then decide what the plot or what I was going to, from that. And then I took Amelia's story and I wanted to go back and forth. And I put in, okay, these are the things I know happened to Amelia during that timeline. And then in between, I tried to make the stories go together so that there was a little bit of an echo between the two stories. Like I thought about, okay, what would they have been doing on this day if this was this day?
Pregnancy was probably
and where she was in her pregnancy. Yeah.
Thing for girls and women.
Yeah.
Forever.
And also, like, sometimes I looked at what the weather was that day. So whenever I made reference to the weather, that was all real. There really was a drought going on. And how would that affect that family? And how would, so that's how and then from each of those cards in the chapters, then I would do a little bit of both legal. Yeah, I mean, both. I have notebooks that I use, and sometimes it's easier for me to handwrite than it is, and then I'll go back and write it.
That's a great idea, though. So this is, I'm telling on me. It was really annoying to read just a short chapter about somebody and then jump to the next, and I just didn't stumble onto the fact that you could. I'm so disciplined about reading page after page that you could jump. You could just read about Amelia.
Yeah, Betty Ann.
I never would have.
And that's a great idea.
Did Betty tell you she did
No,
that?
and honestly, I never intended for anyone to do that. Like, to me,
But you could. It's
you
a book.
could.
I
You
thought
could.
Betty.
And honestly,
There
the
are no
story,
rules.
I
right?
don't know how I learned that she did that,
But
but she.
jump around a book all the time.
But I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
I didn't think about reading straight through.
No,
And
I'm
it-
sure you
No,
could.
we've
And I wish
had
I'd have done
We've
that.
had another book that was like this.
Right.
We've had several books.
Devil in
and
the
I
White
mean,
City.
Nishi We've been reading since 2001.
Devil in the White City was like that.
But this was the most.
And I love that book.
But this was the most
Yeah, I do.
annoying.
well,
But I wish I'd have thought of that.
probably because they're short chapters, so it
Yes.
there was a big jump between them.
Yeah.
So did you really?
So that made it easy.
Were you influenced by Faulkner's As I Lay Dying?
No, I was influenced by Devil in the White City, though.
Mother Faulkner.
His was a short. His was all a little short. 3, 4, 5 pages. And there's probably
But was it
150
different
chapters.
people? I can't remember. Was it different
There's
things
probably
going
10
on?
characters or something, and basically trying to get their mother, who was at the beginning listening to her coffin being nailed together, and then her son.
Maybe now I
took
could
her-
go back and read Faulkner.
Now that you practiced all this back.
I
and
had
forth.
this good practice.
Every chapter was was titled by the name of the character.
Well,
and that's what. Yeah.
So,
Well,
so do
I-
you and Jillian hang out together now?
No, I've never met her. Yeah,
Did you read Gone Girl?
I did. Yeah, I read a couple of her books.
Yeah, we know her.
They're
mother.
very
Yeah.
dark.
Did we read the other one after Gone Girl?
No.
Sharp
Yeah,
objects.
I did.
Sharp objects.
I think I might have read all three. Then dark. What was the other
Yeah.
one? Dark.
Dark something.
So are you going to write more?
If I had a good idea, I would. But this one, I was just like I said, so compelled,
I have-
so passionate
I have
about
an
it.
idea for you.
Oh,
Okay.
see?
Can't wait to
John,
hear this.
Jacob's life.
Since you're,
Why don't you write your own book, John?
since you're like you like it nonfiction blending with fiction,
Uh-huh.
you could take an idea of a book club that is formed for say maybe 20, 22 years,
Uh-huh.
and each character has secret images of each other, but they don't know what those are over the 23 years.
Ooh.
I didn't know I did.
If I were
And
ever,
it plays out against a book that they're reading.
if I ever were to write a a fiction novel, it would be a mystery because I love them myself. I think it would be fun to plot a mystery, but I just don't have any ideas.
So what did we read? We read one Agatha Christie so far.
Which one did you read?
What?
5 Little Piggies.
Yeah, Three
Yeah.
Little Piggies.
That's my favorite of hers, actually.
That was
Five
my
Little-
choice.
Wait, it was-
Oh no, I have not read Three Little Piggies. I've read in them
It was
there were
five.
none,
Which one?
and then there were none, which had a different name that they
Wait.
changed.
It was
It was 10 Little Indians.
10 Little
yeah.
Indians, yeah.
No, we read Five Little Piggies.
Really?
Because it was my choice.
Did you like it?
It was
Because I've
Agatha
not read
Christie.
that one.
I
Was this the
Like
island
Miss-
isolated on?
Well,
an
so
island?
we love Henneman Cal. He was a mystery policeman writer from Sweden.
Amen, Kel.
Bill and I do, and my mom. We all read Henneman Kel when my mom was alive, and there was like 5 books, and he was
John read them all too.
Was it Hetty?
John read them all.
Hanny.
Hanny, Hann.
Well, who was the
E.
detective?
Kurt Wall.
Hanny,
Okay,
Kurt
Wallander.
Wallinger.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, Walt. Okay.
Wallen,
Yeah.
Kurt. And we went to Sweden, actually, to follow his trail. Because he was a mystery policeman, and there were all mysteries about what was going on in the area. But we don't always do mysteries. I mean, we have done 23 years.
So we've done one mystery?
We've done one mystery and one every
I would
month.
consider Gone Girl a mystery.
Thriller, maybe.
That we've read?
We
In
read
our-
Gone Girl, didn't we?
Yeah. But we've done more than one.
Bless you.
I know.
Yeah,
I
that's
have
not a
little
traditional
allergic
mystery, it's more like a thriller.
What
I'm
about
gonna,
what about
I'm
Devil
gonna
in
wrap
White
up
City?
the
Would that be kind
recording.
of a
So
mystery?
thanks,
Or is
Michi.
that-
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say
Oh.
one thing, but it doesn't necessarily have to be recorded. You were talking about how I decided to write them together. But the other thing that was another decision I had to make is what genre to write them in. And to write, because I couldn't figure out, should I make it all nonfiction or should I make it all...
But you have to pick
Historical
that. You have to
fiction.
pick that before you write,
Well, I mean, I can do it any way
or
I
you have
want.
to guide it.
But I felt like I needed to know the genre before I
sure,
started
sure.
writing, because I had to know the perimeters of how to write it. And so, even though I actually had, at the time, I made the decision, more information about Amelia, if I were to follow the same timeline, I didn't have the day-to-day detail the way I did in Sarah. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose to do hers in
Sure.
historical fiction. The other reason was that there are pros and cons of each and boundaries in each. And it was kind of a nice way to be able to do the things in Amelia's story that I wanted to say. And because when you write in nonfiction, you don't really have a room for your voice. And I didn't have room for any of the girls' voices. And so by doing Amelia's, I had a way to weave in the opinions of the townspeople that I had read about, but they were just opinions. I didn't know how to put them in the nonfiction. And so it was a way of adding another perception of the story that also is real, but I didn't have the same parameters that I had in writing the nonfiction. So a lot of the things that Amelia thought or did, those were some of the things that in the articles, they interviewed, some of the people that were children at the time in the 60s, and some of the things that they had said that was just perception.
In the 1860s.
No, in the 1960s, they would be older women that were children, and like that Flora. I read an article that she talked about when they knocked on the door, but some of the things were very perception based, or even things that were passed down in the generation in the town, because they talked about that case for a while, and so it was sort of rumored. But I wanted to capture that, and I could do that in Amelia without, and still stay very factual with Sarah.
Well, that would really, I think, would help your writing, because you could stay bounded in the facts, but you could be creative with the other.
Right.
And the personality, the people come through with personalities. I think
Thank you.
I was very surprised. I was pleasantly surprised.
That actually means a lot to me, because I put a lot of thought into how you do that. If you're writing fiction and you want to develop a character, then you think about what their motives are and what's important to them, and then you show it in their action. So I almost reversed it. I looked and I saw their character or their action, and I said, okay, what does this tell me about this character? And then I could,
like her mom, like Amelia's mom, cold, but yet such a loving.
Yeah.
She was doing it to protect Amelia. She was like, the world is cold. This is what I'm going to show you, because you have to harden yourself. But yet, in the end, she did so many loving things for Amelia.
Yeah.
All right.
And in those characters, I because that was historical fiction, I had a little more liberty in, but I still tried to base that on. You can shut it off.
Yeah.
The time.
Thanks for
The time.
I mean, we don't have to
No,
quit talking about it, but
No.
but thanks. I wish we had the author here every time. So thanks, Mishi.
Oh, well, we don't